This may be the first light novel adaptation in recent years that actually cares about me and not my wallet. The Journey of Elaina is by far the best show of 2020, and here's why. We start off the show very minimalist and bright. A young and intuitive girl wants to become a witch. Through her upbringing and practice, she has landed herself the position as the youngest initiate in history to become a witch. The problem is that no witch wants to have her as an apprentice for some reason. Later, she comes across a very friendly and non-intimidating witch that agrees to help her with her apprenticeship. The joy on Elaina's face is justified, and there is an understandable reason why. There is a reason for my retelling of these events, believe it or not. How does that little sequence of events sound entertaining to any extent? There is quite literally nothing about my statement which best explains the first 15 minutes of episode 1 feel engaging or otherwise original in any fashion. That's what Elaina does. It has this really strange yet super engaging pattern of setting up foundations in the beginning of an episode and coming down super hard on the idea with enough strategy and power to even give you goosebumps. In fact, for a show about a traveling witch, it has some of the most sinister and horrific moments out on the market currently. It has a desire to give gratification to your consumption of the show, and with each episode, slowly, you begin to see a thread of events correlate in this way. There's a lot of elements to attribute my liking of this show to, but the primary factor that sold me from the very start was simply Elaina. There is so much wit to her mannerisms, personality, and engagement that she alone steals the show. What makes her special among more contemporary protagonists is her unique approach to life itself. She really isn't in it for the splendor or bounties of a fulfilling life she could have, rather every moment is simply an experience to enhance herself. Through the course of the show, I couldn't help but draw parallels to Violet Evergarden. Build a character through experience, that being traveling to different destinations that set overarching tones for that episode and meeting people that are plot devices to build and develop the protagonist's sense of being. But where Elaina actually exceeds Violet Evergarden is in the character department. Although Violet has a fundamentally different understanding of the world and herself by the end of the series, Elaina doesn't necessarily have to change that greatly to be interesting. In fact, a macro-level change is arguably worse in terms of character development because there's more to say about an individual through subtlety. One subtlety we see come to fruition even early into the series is Elena's boundaries of trust. In a critically damaging fight against her master in only episode 1, she grows to understand that the underestimation of anyone would be fodder to her downfall, and carries her journey on a sentiment surrounding that, which is why she never stays long and moves frequently. While in Violet Evergarden, it took Violet the entire season to become understandably different when it comes to her understanding of love, which is the crux of the entire show. I've come to not like that aspect quite a bit because of how much emphasis and weight it puts on the shoulders of a not very charismatic character in a glossy setting. The Journey of Elaina just simply has a better knowledge when it comes to development on a micro level, rather than the overarching nature of Violet Evergarden. But one could argue that having very specific and introspective development to a series enhances the experience far more. In that sentiment you would be partly correct, but let's take a look at the entertainment factor of a show. To the trained eye, Elaina is a bit one-dimensional, similar to Violet. The unfortunate truth about these types of shows where episodes cover an entirely new step of one's journey is that telling the story of that episode while combining and incorporating that character into the plot is difficult. Not difficult in the sense that you must relate the character to the theme of the episode, because I feel that's quite simple. No, the most difficult part is attachment. Anyone can let their character be a tangible accessory to the world, but can you relate and help compress that character to be understandable to the eyes of the viewer? Elaina struggles to cross this boundary throughout the course of the entire series, and it's very easy to argue in favor of her being a very basic and non-compelling character overall. In my case, what I desired was not the creativity of the character, but the creativity of how we use that character. In the show, I got exactly that. Elaina is given a multitude of unique situations each episode, and she is involved in the plot of these episodes for different reasons. Not just solely because she is a witch, but for many reasons, whether it be because she encountered her old apprentice, her teacher, or anything. Every time she becomes involved, it cannot be put simply because of the premise of the show. Nuance is there, and it may be hard to see, but for my case, I felt very pleased consuming the show for what it was. Whether it achieved anything or not, I liked it. Elaina is fun to watch, and you get a lot of enjoyment out of simply watching it for what it is and not what it's trying to say. The Tatami Galaxy, for example, is a show that has a lot of elements that are centralized around making you think outside the box and through an art house lens. but it's just not engaging to watch. I love shows that delve into fascinating ideas about ourselves and the world around us, but if it's not entertaining in the process, there's no real reason for me to call it entertainment. Elaina is fun in most senses. It has a good understanding of when to let the animation speak for itself, and doesn't have to have its characters yelling each other's names 50 times in a fight scene, which is a definite plus. I also like that it's not afraid to speed past expository background or dialogue because even the creators know that it's boring, yet they have to leave it in because the next scene won't make any sense without it. By far the most surprising element I was not ready for in this show was its animation. I personally think that the visual elements and overall scope that is portrayed is far more exciting than the actual writing. Most of the dialogue isn't really as engaging as I would like it to be, but at least the overall aesthetic fully recuperates that loss. The team behind this show spared me the horror of watching the piss-poor movements and quality of production behind most light novel adaptations. For that gracious act of kindness to my eyeballs, my appreciation is immeasurable. In fact, speaking of the team behind this show, you might be surprised to know that a man named Toshiyuki Kabuka directed this. If you have literally no clue who this is, I don't blame you. This is the guy who directed all 3 Berserk films and is a brand new director at that. And I have to say, his style just fits so excellently with the structure of Elaina in the sense that he has a high competency to correlate action directly to character emotion. In the Berserk films, he really puts a strong focus on the facial expressions and mannerisms of Griffith and Guts. Although a lot more dramatic, those elements still reside greatly in Elena's progression. Elaina, and especially the supporting cast, are put into the limelight quite frequently, with close facial shots to grant gravity to situations. His style complements the power behind emotional scenes, especially those that surround a battle, to the point where I think it may actually be his strongest asset as a new director in the industry. There are just so many amazing quality-of-life moments that put me at ease to watch it unfold. I can't tell you how anticlimactic it feels to have a wide-pan still frame of characters at a distance. It's obviously not Kabuka deadlifting the show on his back, but what he does to the show's benefit is tangibly felt compared to the presence of others. The common thread you come to understand as a viewer throughout all 12 episodes is the structure and formula that was put into place. The essential ingredient to Elena's storytelling is effective foreshadowing. Now, in a traditional sense, most writing wants to be conservative in how much they particularly say in regards to future events, and sort of just place elements in the background for you to realize the extent of that action. In Elaina, that type of foreshadowing still is captured, but done a lot more blatantly and to better payoff than what most can dream of. Certain items or people are not placed into motions as simply Easter eggs for attentive second-time viewers, but as actual development to the episode they dwell in. Facets at the beginning of an episode are 100% guaranteed to appear or be expanded upon by the climax of the episode. And usually, I would tell you that this type of storytelling gets repetitive and boring to predict, but that doesn't really happen at all. Each time a plot device is set into motion, there is immense payoff that is both entertaining and gratifying to the narrative at the same time. Whether it be an emotional or serious moment, every time there is a contextual setup, there will be a guaranteed payoff. There is nothing worse in my mind for a story to ramble and moan through expository dialogue and not follow up on it, which is why I really think Elaina is quite a pro at showing, not telling. If they are digging a pit at the beginning of the episode, you can bet they are going to use that pit they spent 2 minutes making at the end of the episode. It's not just smart, but actually quite genius in a way for how expertly woven and well realized each expanded element of each episode's focus is absolutely demolished and rebuilt to even greater heights. Another way this show shines is in how it portrays the passage of time. Characters from previous episodes don't just show up because they are simply recurring. They are there to tangibly show you their personal advancement that happens off-screen and to simultaneously examine how much real time has passed between each episode. Saya, Elena's first disciple, is featured in episode 2 as a fledgling amateur and brought back in episode 6 as a professional witch. And we even get to see how far she has come as a witch, seeing her use spells competently through visuals and not just talk. In fact, 1 episode later, the entire narrative of that episode is based around this very idea. All of the runtime is completely dedicated to parallel repeating narratives between Elaina and presumably her mother, who both create pastimes for different people through their travels, quite literally validating that their travels even happened. This is through the advent of a Tale of Two Cities type of narrative. To put it simply, as a child, Elaina is fascinated by the folktale of 2 cities who have a tradition of having tourists write on the wall separating them to see who is more popular. Little does she know it was her own mother who started that tradition more than a decade ago. Then, in the second half of that episode, a different family, but told exactly parallel to Elaina, tells their daughter of how their grape throwing tradition began. And little does that daughter know, Elaina is the one who started that tradition all those years ago. Again, this isn't meant to be subtle at all, but the intended purpose of the entire episode. To show you the impact of time and how you can leave an impact on time, whether intentional or not. Absolutely brilliant. I really cannot ask for more, especially with how easy it is to watch it unfold. You come to realize that these parallels throughout the entire show, not just the episode, are quite genius. The one major thing I had hoped for this show not to do was to have a mediocre midsection, and unfortunately it does. After a very good first 4 episodes, we get a bit more self-reflective and slow with the pacing. Not in terms of new locations, but in terms of writing. Elaina in episodes 5 through 8 feels not like the protagonist, but a supporting cast member. And since the whole show literally revolves around her specifically, this doesn't help. Elaina begins to take up less presence on the screen as a personality. Her sarcasm and cynicism are more in addition rather than integrated into her character as the previous episodes had done. These episodes take a bit more time to focus on the facets like different cultures, depth of a witch-based society, and trying to reinforce that Elaina is a powerful witch, which I hardly think was the appeal of the show at all. If I wanted to watch an OPMC dominating everything in their path, I could literally watch anything else. The appeal of Elaina is the narrative, only further complemented by a very well-realized main character that both represents the world she lives in while appealing to our world's enjoyments. World building is usually a common concept that most shows employ, but it's actually a common trap that shifts the focus to the wrong elements, especially at the wrong times or with the wrong intent. The intent of this stretch of episodes, as explained, is not put at the wrong time, but it does shift the direction of the series in a negative light. Especially episode 8, which is by far the worst offender of the entire series. What I felt needed to be done was to continue what had already been founded, pumping out new ideas, combined with new locations, plus character building moments. I would have been totally satisfied with that. But in these specific episodes, we go to new locations, but with no real benefit to the micro-level development in both ideas or character. So in turn, it feels like a very stagnated period of the watching process. This in mind, it seemed as though the series would continue this specific agenda for the duration of the rest of the show, and you can count me in as one of those doubters who lost a bit of hope and joy for the future of it. But you can bet I was surprised to see when episode 9 hit with a force of a train, completely returning to the joyride that was the beginning of the series. But then slows down right after that once again. An absolutely critical returning point for the series, and essential to maintaining my further attention, but to a degree squandered by an alright falling action. Again, I'm glad at least a major shift happened at all, but I won't let a transgression like a rather average midsection be ignored. In fact, the final stretch of episodes were good, but they rarely lived up to the rather impressive beginning 4 episodes. I still think that even with the midsection being the way it is, my overall opinion could shift over time considering how much I don't value the midpoint of most series, and heavily focus on the execution of rising and falling action. Elaina is pretty jam-packed with ideas and strategies that are pretty uncommon among today's market, especially for light novel adaptations. It's not quite a crown jewel, but succeeds in effectively coercing you to believe in the world and believe in the feasibility of its narrative. Sometimes the hardest battle for a show to win is attention, and through a mediocre midsection, the entertainment value dropped heavily enough to warrant boredom to an extent. But out of everything I watched this year, a little mishap here and there is not really unbelievable to cry about. Mistakes here and there, but a truly better experience made a reality through a very stunning amount of effort through means of animation, direction, and narrative. So with that in mind, I am pretty confident in awarding The Journey of Elaina a strong 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching.